Welcome to Experts Unleashed, a podcast that aims to uncover how professionals and entrepreneurs transform their experience into income while making a positive impact in the world. I'm your host, Joel Irway, and over the past 4 years, I've helped entrepreneurs develop and launch their expert-based businesses to grow past 6 and 7 figures per year. Now, a professional expert serves their community through paid training, education, or service, and this podcast will show you how to design and execute your plan to become a 6 or 7 figure expert without a big team. So, let's get started. What's going on, experts? Joel Irway here with another episode of Experts Unleashed, and I am on a super high right now because I just hopped off the horn with our next guest, Adrienne Dorison, and this was just an absolutely mind-blowing interview. Now, Adrienne is the CEO of Run Like Clockwork, a training and operations consultancy that equips entrepreneurs to design a business that runs itself. Now, Adrienne has helped hundreds of businesses from Fortune 500 corporations to fast growth startups expand profit margins and cut costs in 90 days or less through the power of operational efficiency. Now, Run Like Clockwork was designed to enable passionate leaders to step up and achieve more while doing less. Adrienne lives in St. Petersburg, Florida with her dreamboat hubby. That's what she actually called him, and their 2 sweet pups. And so what we talked about on this interview ranges from when Adrienne was a safari guide to transitioning into her role in a Fortune 500 company, and ultimately how she was able to discover her opportunity as becoming an operational guru, an operations consultant. Adrienne is super smart, and she completely opened up the book for us on this episode. You're absolutely going to love it. If you've ever wondered how to become more efficient, how to get more things done, and how to have your business virtually run itself. Now, as a small business owner, I can completely relate to a lot of the things that we talked about. And so I went full student on this because I want you guys to understand what it takes to extract this information like Adrienne was sharing. Not extract it, but how you can apply it and learn how to implement what she was teaching. Anyway, I'm giddy over this episode, so I want to cut myself off and jump right into today's interview. Let's do it. Adrienne, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. That was quite the intro. I appreciate it. Kind words, always appreciated.
Yes, of course. So, Adrienne, you were a mutual introduction through our friend Selena Sue. Selena is an amazing person, and I'm super grateful. And we also have another mutual connection with a previous guest with Jen Kem.
Oh, yes.
So I know about you. I know, what you do, and this is going to be a very enlightening and hopefully entertaining conversation. I like to make these lighthearted. For my audience who isn't super familiar with what you do, give us a quick background of what you currently do now in your business and what your area of expertise is.
Yes. So right now I have a consulting firm. I kind of have 2 companies right now. So I have a consulting firm where I do consulting for small businesses who are interested in, getting a private look on their operations and the efficiency side of things. I also have done some outsourced COO work on that side of the business. And now I have been, over the past probably 6 to 8 months, in a partnership with a author speaker named Mike Michalowicz, who we have some joint intellectual property coming out soon in his new book, which is called Clockwork. And then we have a company called Run Like Clockwork that delivers operational efficiency for small business owners. So this is like specific to the small business owner versus lots of operational efficiency programs that cater to a corporate market. So we're really excited about serving small businesses with the idea of how do you improve your operation and get way more results with less effort, less energy, less resources to create operational excellence inside that company. So that is our training and consulting company that is kind of the big chunk of what I'm working on now. So I'm in a little bit of a transition too.
So transition, meaning like you're transitioning more towards the partnership stuff?
Yes. So transitioning more towards, any private consulting that I do will probably move towards that business anyways. And then keeping my personal brand, because that brand is, I see that in the future as being more of like my thought leadership space, talking about things that I want to move forward in terms of advocacy and ideas and things like that. But primarily working in our consultancy firm.
Very cool. So a lot of my audience, my listeners right now, they are in that small business space. So before we kind of kick it back and talk about your journey up, tell me a little bit, just give me like one key insight that as somebody who's successful, maybe a solopreneur, or maybe they've got one or two employees, like they've got success under their belt. Like, what do you see as the most common mistake that they do as they start to grow and they become inefficient?
Yeah. So most of my entrepreneurs come to me for one of two reasons. One, they want to scale faster and they need to figure out how to actually do that. So we take a really good look at the business and figure that out. Number two, they are scaling too quickly and the operations are at risk as they basically get the thing that they always wanted, right? They're getting the thing they've always wanted and it's sort of an operational disaster or risk for the company. So the biggest challenge and piece of what I do is helping these CEOs understand how to let go of a lot of the things that they've always done inside the business. So when I usually come into a team, the CEO may not be doing a lot of the things that they had done before, but they're still somewhat like basket woven into every department or every process or every system. And so it's sort of impossible for them to step away from that business, or it's impossible for the team to execute effectively and efficiently without the CEO or the lead being involved at too many stages, too many small pieces of that puzzle. So what we like to say is that like we want to design you out of your operation to a point, right? Like we want to design a business that can run without you, and not just run without you, but actually grow without you, which is sort of like mind blowing for some of our CEOs. They're like, okay, I could take a vacation and it could maintain. But the idea of someone else having a revenue driving decision inside the company is sort of it's not a thing for them at this point, right? So we want to let go of some of that control, which there's a ton of different things that we can do to get to that point. And it's a process. It does not happen overnight. This is not just like a mindset shift of saying like, I'm letting go of control. Like it doesn't happen that way. There has to be system structures, values, culture in place in order for entrepreneurs to do that. But you could even just start looking at your own business and starting to see like, where am I involved in like too many decisions or too many approvals or too many processes? And that will start to create potentially you can identify it, but it might be creating some resentment on the team where people aren't able to do the things that they really want to be doing or add the value that they really know they can. Or from your perspective, you might be wondering, why isn't, so-and-so on my team able to do things 5 steps ahead of me like I want her to? It's because you haven't given her the control, you haven't given her the resources, and it's causing your entire team to be super inefficient, right? Anytime that something has to come back to you every single time, like we can think of your business as a factory line, and your factory line is probably super inefficient, thinking of like how that one decision has to go through the process. And that's just like on like a very micro scale, right? Like
guilty as charged on,
no worries.
I know exactly what you're talking about. When I have my own team, like, why aren't they doing this? And like, I know it's me, like, but it's
Right.
like I feel like, and maybe you can speak to this, I feel like most entrepreneurs, I don't know, maybe they don't know it's them.
I think that people have the mindset, because a lot of people ask me this, like, how do you do that? Because aren't people super resistant to that change, or like don't want to let go of a lot of that control, or like want to be involved in every single thing? And that I would say, well, if they're aware that they are the problem, but they're not interested in removing themselves as the problem, and they're very, very clear about that, they're not a good fit to work together, because it's not going to work. There's just like, we have to have that buy-in from the CEO, from the person the president, whoever is leading the company. But most people that are interested in removing themselves or creating operational excellence or removing inefficiencies, they do understand that they are the problem, and they are aware that it's going to be hard to go through the process, but they know what's on the other side of that is way worth it. And I think even like emotionally and mental health wise and quality of life wise, they know that they can't sustainably keep doing what they're doing and continue to grow into the vision that they have. Usually they have a very big vision for this business, or they have a vision for multiple other businesses, the entrepreneurs that I work with, right? And they know like, well, it ain't happening if I keep doing this. Maybe that's worth it to them, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think you've got a very clear distinction. Creating operational excellence, like that's catchy to me. Like, okay, awesome. I'm a victim of probably inefficient operations, and it hurts. It really does hurt, and so I can totally see this. I can totally see. Obviously, this is super valuable. But what I want to do now is I want to kind of like, you've got a very specific skill set, which is awesome. Creating operational excellence for companies, small businesses, and other partnerships. Right? How did you discover? Like, I want to talk about the journey now. Right? I want to talk about how you got here and the major pivot points that kind of popped up that led you to having this very specific skill set of operational excellence for small business owners, right? Yeah. Can you kind of take me back through, let's start in the beginning of like when you started out as an entrepreneur, or maybe it started before that, but where did this skill set come up? Where did you identify this skill set that you had?
Yes. So it started way before my entrepreneur. I was never like the kid who thought they were going to be an entrepreneur. I was not selling things to other friends. Like I thought I was going to like go work for a company, be the VP, be the CEO. Like I was good at getting an outcome, like getting a result. If someone told me like, here's the result we want you to get, I was very good at like following that path. And so I felt like my role is going to be within an organization that I did not create necessarily. So I didn't necessarily plan this out, but my background, my degree is in something. I'm one of those people that also does not have a degree that is related to what they do. Very common, right? My background is in wildlife ecology and conservation in the undergrad space. I studied abroad. I lived in South Africa, trained and certified to be a safari guide in international wildlife management. So I've lived like these weird multiple lives. And then I worked for a little bit and then went back to school, got my master's degree in forestry, natural resource, and economics. And so what I was doing was studying the market side of natural resources. And from there, I thought I was going to go work for a nonprofit or something like that. I ended up getting hired by a private Fortune 500 organization where I ended up on the business side of things, right? So I was studying markets and the economies, and I had a very strong background in statistics, like through my master's thesis and degree, all the research I was doing. So I was an asset in that area. And so when I joined a large Fortune 500 manufacturing paper company, and from there they trained me in Lean Six Sigma, which is a operational efficiency framework, process improvement tools that we were utilizing internally inside the company. So I was doing supply chain logistics and project management using these tools inside this super large supply chain system. So I was working with everyone from the forest, the person who owned the stump of wood, the tree, all the way through to the person who was going to log it, the person who was going to haul it to the wood yard, the person who was scaling it in at the wood yard, the person who was using the crane to take it off the truck, all the way into the chipper when we're chipping it into the paper mill where they're turning it into paper, cardboard products, et cetera, and then shipping it back out. So I was working with this super large, complex supply chain and looking for the inefficiencies there and how we could create cost savings inside that company. So I had a lot of internal experience there and dealing with what I found to be the two pieces of this, the processes and how we could improve those. But most importantly, the people, right? Like stakeholders and everyone involved in that process working together. And I think that that's like a big part of what I do now, but like really getting a complex understanding of that. So my expertise was from the corporate world, and I was doing this internally inside this corporate organization. And this was the path. I loved doing this work. And then all of a sudden there was this point when I kind of looked at one of my mentors inside the company, and I looked at his life and I looked at his job, and it was like he had been there for 40 years. This was very common for people to be in this forestry space. It's a very antiquated industry to be at the same company for 40, 50, like their entire career. And it was a very non-diverse space. I was the only woman, like even in our team, in our department. There was a lot of older men, and they hadn't hired older white men that they hadn't hired in a while, right? And so it was me looking at that and being like, I had this like aha moment of like, I thought that that's what I wanted, and maybe it could still be what I want. I wasn't sure what I wanted. I just knew that it didn't seem as appealing as it always did in the past. And so I started to explore like what other options were for me. I never really thought I like I said, I always thought I was just going to grow inside that company, and like I was on a fast track, right? Like I was going to be whatever I wanted to be in my head, like inside that company, until it wasn't working anymore, right? Like it works until it doesn't.
So what wasn't working? Just when you saw the vision, then in your mind, it was like,
I think it was probably a combination of things that maybe all sort of like came together at the same time. So there was definitely a value rub for me because I was doing like putting forward a lot of initiatives and seeing a lot of projects that had a lot of potential to create cost savings. But then there was not buy-in, or like we weren't getting approvals. It would take a year to get something through in the corporate space, or we'd be working on something, but then because we were also working with a union inside the mill, like I could push a project, for 6 months forward. But if I get a no from a crane operator who has no incentive to do what I ask him to do, it was sort of frustrating to me to be doing all of this work, being paid to do all of this work, and not feel like I was able to contribute the value to the team that I really knew I was capable of. Like I was always the person who would volunteer for additional projects. Like I was trying to like get my value out there and like push myself so that I could push the business forward. And I often felt like I was in an environment that was actually pushing against that a lot of the time. And so that became very frustrating. And there was just a lot of political things in terms of, I remember having one meeting with my manager at the time, and they would do, our reviews, and it was like below commitments, meet commitments, or exceeds commitments. And he was like, well, it's sort of a bell curve, and we only give out one exceeds, and we have to give out one below, and we just do a rotation. So you're not up for exceeds this year, even though you had a lot of great projects. And I was
corporate politics.
I was like, so there's no point. What is that? Like, it was just like, I literally laughed out loud at that point. I was like, what is the incentive to do great hard work? Yes, internally, but it just felt like, wow, if you're even admitting this, and you're also admitting that someone's going to get below commitment, even if they didn't do something below commitments, it was just, one of my core values is like integrity. And I was like, this just does not feel good to me. So I think it was like a combination of all of those things at one time, and sort of looking at a lot of the executives and realizing that their entire life was spent in an office chair inside of the headquarters office. They were there, like I would get phone calls at 5 a.m. that everyone thought we were creating oxygen. And that's one of my core like values inside our current business is literally says, we're not creating oxygen, right? Like I cannot have people on my team thinking like they are going to get anxiety or stress over some of the work that we're doing. It's just not a good quality of life.
Okay.
And people would call me at 5 a.m. as if it was an emergency, as if we're creating oxygen. I was just like, this is bananas, right? Like everybody calm down. So I think it was like a combination of those things, and seeing the quality of life of the executive that I like thought I wanted to be, being like, I don't know that that's it, right? Like there's got to be something more for me.
So I love this part of your story, right? And I want to go back to something that probably plays a role with what you do today. And with operations, I'm not an operations expert. In fact, I'm a failed operations builder, or let's just say I'm a work in progress, right? I don't like saying failures. Everything's a learning lesson, right?
Yeah.
I know from my past experience, like trying to, and it seems like this is what you ran into when you were trying to insert yourself, not saying that in a bad way, but like trying to improve existing operations. Like you talk to the crane driver and like, they just don't want to do it. What have you learned trying to do that? Like, and especially like what you do today, like getting involved in an existing system, like you see the inefficiency, but there are other people at play. Like, how would you handle that today? Like, and like, how would somebody be able to fix that?
So that's a big chunk of what we do, right? Is like understanding what does your culture on your team need to look like in order for people to not only adjust and make the changes that they need to make to be more efficient, but also to come up with the ideas themselves for, those changes, as well as be just as excited as you to come up with ideas for improving the operation and improving the efficiency of your operation. And I think that does start with culture. It starts
with
a bunch of times. Having a buy-in from like number one, the CEO. Like we talked about, like in the very beginning of like, how do you get people to, do these things, or are people like willing to do these things? That's a big piece of it. So when we have workshops that we bring CEOs, and usually they'll bring a few members of their team with, and I've had people say, can I just send my team? Can I just send my COO or, other members of my team, my marketing department, my sales team, whatever? Can I just send them? And the answer is no, right? Because they could learn a whole ton of things. And I do recommend they come with you because everyone has to have just the understanding. And really what it is a paradigm shift in your thinking. And so if you can, as the CEO, number one, understand that, number two, bring that into your team and equip them to think that way, sort of empower them to think that way, let them know that it's not only accepted, but it's encouraged to think this way, to think autonomously, to look for changes that we're making, to know that I, as the CEO, am not going to have all the answers. You probably have better answers than me, and I'm looking for them, right? These are just some examples. You have the freedom to try new things without my approval. You have the freedom to improve a process that isn't working, right? Giving ownership over to other people. But if someone says to me, I just want to send my team, I immediately know it's not going to work, right? Because the team needs to look to you to say, can I do this? Because that's what they're doing now. So it's not that you have to do anything when you come to our workshop necessarily. It's not that you have to do more when you leave, which is always the CEO's, fear, right? But you do need to embody it, I would say. And I think that's the biggest thing. But I love working with small teams because they're so much more agile to do these things, right? Like they're so much more agile than a 90,000 person organization where it takes much longer to get that buy-in from not just the top, but all the way from the bottom and everyone in between. But that's really essentially what we have to do on your small team as well.
Yeah. I think so for me, if somebody had come to me 2 years ago, 3 years ago, like as I was, working on my business and said, Joel, you need to focus on your core values. Like for me, I'm a visionary and a marketing and a sales guy. And it's like core values, like, no, I need to bring in revenue. Right. But it's like you said before, it's a paradigm shift. It's like for me now, I see why core values are important because that's like your guiding light. And you just have to have that paradigm shift. I totally relate to what you're saying.
Yeah. And that's like one piece of it, right? Yeah. So for people who are like, oh, but that can't be it. It's not it, right? But that's like where we have to start if you want to be able to successfully put in the other processes and systems, right? Because like anyone, I think, can Google what an SOP looks like, standard operating procedure, put that in place, sure. But if the team isn't set up in a way, culture-wise or leadership-wise, to actually execute it. That's why when we talk about operations, we're like people and processes. Processes, sometimes fairly straightforward, can be easy, right? But the thinking that we need our people to do, that's where the value comes in when we can like integrate these things together.
Cool. Okay. So you've started to consider other options. You say, okay, maybe this really, you're still at your Fortune 500 company, the paper company, you're starting to explore, right? So let's continue this story.
Yeah. So I'm exploring, I'm trying to figure out like what is next for me and what does that look like? It never to me in my mind was another business. I was sort of just feeling creatively suffocated. I remember even telling like some of my mentors at the company that I felt this way. And so what I did was I started a blog. So I started blogging on the side just to talk about some of the ideas and things that I was doing or things that I was thinking, both from a personal perspective and from a business perspective as well, in terms of operations and improvement. Because I think everything that I talk about could also apply to your personal life, your personal habits, like a lot of those things intertwine. And so I was talking about it from both of those lenses as an individual, just to get like some of my thoughts out on paper. At the same time, just in terms of like context of the story, at the same time, I was paying off all of my student debt. So I was taking a class by a guy named Dave Ramsey, who is very well known in the financial space. And he has a course called Financial Peace University. I was going through that class and I was trying to pay off. I had about $50,000 of student loan debt, and I wanted to pay it off as quickly as possible because my husband, my now husband, my then boyfriend, was way more financially savvy than me. And I was embarrassed of my financial situation. So I was like, I got to get out of this debt if this man is ever going to marry me. So during that time, I was blogging. And then I started to, like, I mentioned the Dave Ramsey thing because it was sort of my gateway drug into the online entrepreneurial space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think anyone who has like come into the space, I would encourage you to like identify like who was your gateway drug, right? Like, who was the person that you first found that then introduced you to someone else and someone else and someone else. And then you like fell down this rabbit hole and found this whole world. And that's what it was for me. I think that he introduced me to John Acuff, which then I bought the book Quitter, which is all about quitting your job, right? And then I found another like online community. And so really during that time, as I was still blogging, I was still at my corporate job, I was still paying off this debt. But now I'm finding that there are coaches and consultants and, product-based businesses and people with digital programs and people that are building these businesses either on the side or it's now their full-time thing. And they're like solely, dependent on themselves, and they're putting their expertise into like what we're talking about here. They're putting their expertise into something and they're selling it. And I was just like blown away. I was just like, what is this? Right? Like,
you got hooked.
I was hooked and I was excited, right? Like I was excited because I saw people making their dreams come true. Like they were taking action on things. I'm like such a hustler. I'm such an action taker that I'm like, oh my God, these people are amazing. And it was such a contrast to where like the energy and the environment I was experiencing at work that I was motivated, right? I was driven. I was like, I want to know more of these people. I want to know what's going on here. And from there, I got some ideas to basically do some free sessions. So what I did was I just went onto my Facebook page, my personal Facebook page. So I did have friends that were like from my corporate job. I was just like, I'm just going to like, put this out there. If anyone is interested, you own a business or even an individual at the time, I was just sort of like, could I help you get better results in your life or more specifically in your business through some of the training and concepts and like things that I know. So I put these out there for free, still working my job, trying to figure out like, number one, can I translate this? Like, am I actually good at this in a different context? Mm-hmm. Can I get results for people without all of the resources and like frame that I had in the corporate world? And do I like it? So that was a really big one for me. Like in theory, I could like things, but in practice, was it really what it was all cracked up to be, right? Yep. Like everyone talking about it seems really sexy, but let me actually try this out before I jump ship. So I started doing that on the side. I did it for free for a while and I started getting results for people and I was like loving it. I would work my full day at work. I shifted my schedule so that I was working out and like taking care of myself is very important to me. So like I would wake up at 4:30, I would go work out. I would then go to my corporate job all day. And then I would meet with clients at night and like work on the business at night. And I did this for a good 6 months where I was just like, I was kind of on fire, right? Like, so I don't know how someone lives like that, but it was for a short period of time that it felt doable.
So the topic of what you wanted to teach on your blog and what you're doing for free for your first clients, you just said, I'm just like gonna try operations for a business. Like, was it just your first idea that? Or did
so I didn't even term it as operations. And this is where I kind of think that I was sick of what I was doing in the corporate world, not because I was sick of what I was actually doing. I was sick of the space I was doing it in and the environment that I was doing it in. I was very frustrated by that. And so that led me to believe at that time that I hated my corporate job. I hated what I was doing. I did feel that way. And now looking back, I'm like, wow, I have such a different perspective. I have such a different light for what was going on there. I did not hate my corporate job. I probably hated the environment and the value structure that I was working within, but I actually loved the work that I was doing. But when I first left my corporate job, or when I first kind of started, testing this, I wasn't using the term operations. I was more focused on, can I get you results with less effort, less energy, I maybe was saying some of those things that really is what the operation, like I was still doing a lot of the same things, but I wasn't using that terminology. And I think I was more focused on improvement. Can I help people improve their business? Can I help people improve their life? And through those initial free sessions, I found like, well, I'm not really qualified to help people just improve their life. Like maybe I would be more than like, the average Joe, but like I was more qualified to help specifically on business because that was my expertise. And so that's when I kind of like started focusing more on that. And I think I went a little too broad in the beginning, and I was just helping people with their business get better results in their business. And that was the marketing that I was doing. And so I helped people with what they needed. And only over the past probably 2 years is when I was like, oh, I have to niche on what my actual expertise is. That's a very valuable thing. And I didn't realize how valuable it was in the beginning. I sort of wanted to get away from it. I was like, that's not who I am. That's not me. It's not my identity. I can do so much more. Right. But I had a mentor say to me, like, you have a very valuable expertise that not a lot of people have, and you need to own that space. Like, don't get caught up in the internet marketing world. Don't get caught up in teaching people all these other things that you can teach them because you are very good at them. But that, like, internet marketing is a tool you use inside your business. Your expertise is operations and operational efficiency and excellence. And I was like, yeah, but I don't know how to talk about that to these people, right? So that was that, but that was my work, figuring out, how do I talk about this to people? But I did not like own it when I first left. And that, I think, was a big, I say quote unquote mistake. I'm using air quotes, right? Like it was a mistake, but it was the process I needed to go through to get to where I am. It absolutely served me. My business was still very successful at that time, even without niching on the operations. So I just got a lot of like practice of working with people and different levels of business owners, and realizing that I probably needed to work with a lot of them to figure out like, well, what is a small business like in difference to a corporation? And so that was sort of like my training wheels, I think, to get me to own my expertise again.
So what's fascinating about something that you said, and I want to really highlight it because this can be a huge, somebody who doesn't notice what you noticed when you said you realized that you were sick of your environment, not the work that you were doing. That's so powerful because the environment changes and what you do, for you to be able to notice that like you didn't necessarily hate the work that you were doing, you just hated the environment. I can't even measure how critically important that is.
Right.
I went through the same thing when I was in my sales job. I loved what I was doing in corporate America. I just hated the environment because I was getting those, you're selling oxygen, or you're creating oxygen phone calls. And it caused me to have uncanny amounts of stress and anxiety. But you could have pivoted completely away from operations, and that's not what you did. And not thankfully, but like clearly that was the right decision. But that's such a powerful self-awareness.
And I think it's very common for people, which is why I wanted to share that, right? Like, which is why I think it's important to share that with people, that I had that like aha moment, not in the moment, not even 6 months after the moment, right? But like looking back later, I was like, wow, I actually really loved the things that I was doing, the processes that I was working, the expertise that I was adding, the projects that I was working on. But looking around, I could think of my peers and the conversations that I was having, and most of the conversations were about the toxicity we were in, right? And that can't be a healthy space to be in when those are the only types of conversations that you're like joking around the water cooler about, right? And so just kind of like removing yourself from that environment, start to think about the things you maybe loved about that job, even when it's hard, because your expertise might not be the thing that you want to shove down, but how could you actually leverage it, but move the environment? And it's also an important like identification of how valuable and important our environments are, even in our own businesses that we create, because as our businesses grow, we're creating environments for other people, right? That's the culture that we're trying to create. And we could potentially do the same thing to someone else that was done to us that caused us to want to leave, hate the work we were doing, have a lower quality of life, right? So we want to be very mindful of the power that we hold as entrepreneurs and small business owners, that like we are creating, if you don't want to call it a culture, an environment, right? Like think about that bubble that you're wrapping your employees in, and what does that look like? And what kind of conversations are they having around the water cooler? How could you get them to love their job? And I think a lot of the teams that I work with are remote as well, which becomes a whole nother layer of challenge. So yeah, but it's a big shift in thinking too.
Cool. So I want to ask you a question. When was the first time that you realized like the skill set that you had, like applying it now to this new venture? When was the realize that you had your first aha moment? Like, wow, like I got an amazing result for this person. And maybe it was the first time they paid you, or maybe it was one of your first free clients. But when did you realize that like what you had was really valuable and could potentially turn into what it is today? Like when was that first like trigger point?
Yeah. So I think the first so I think it was like when I was doing it for free, because I was not confident yet to be charging. I was like, who would pay me for this? Right. Even though I was being paid my corporate job. But like who individually would pay me for this? I was not even confident to ask for money in the beginning, which I think I just wanted to be paid for with experience, right? And I was totally okay with that. I was like, let me work on your business for free. So what I did was like, I went back to my personal contacts, and I used to teach spin classes at a spin studio in North Carolina when I was working there. And that was like a side gig. I've always had like side hustles. I just love to teach spin. And so I went back because it was a small business owner, and I had always kind of helped her while I was there. But I kind of reached back out to her and said, like, can I help you with this? Like, I'm trying to do this, outside of my corporate role. I would love to have some sessions with you. I gave her multiple free sessions. It was not just like a one session thing, because I knew I needed a little bit longer to see some actual tangible results. And so we started working together. She was like so grateful to have, an offer of free support. And so we started working together, and she was, starting to see results in her operation on her financial sheets, as well as how the business was running and the stress and anxiety she was feeling previously, to how the team was managing and growing once we started to put some of these things in place. And I think that was the first time that I was like, I asked her, like, would you have paid for this knowing what you know now? And I think that was the most valuable thing I could have done for myself, was to do it for free, to test it out, and then to be seeing like actual moves and shifts, not just on the financials, although that's very, motivating, because producing a tangible result for my clients is important, but also like just the way she was managing energy and stress was very different. The way she was leading her team was very different. And the gratitude that she was expressing by having the support was apparent. And so it gave me the confidence that I needed to just put a price tag on it, to be like, I don't know what pricing is, right? Like going from the corporate world to then running a small business, I was just testing things. And I think that I was always just quick to test, because that was my background, testing and improvement, right? Like if it's not working, we trash it, we do something else. And so I am very familiar with continuous improvement, and knowing that it's not going to be perfect the first time I put it out there, but you cannot fix something that never ships. So I think I had that aha when I got that first tangible result with that spin studio, and then I put a price tag on it. And from there, just, it wasn't like, oh, now all of a sudden I had all this business. I continue to put myself out there. I continue to ask people if they want to work together. I continue to, share value so that people can find me. I think that that's not magic. That's the work, right? But it gave me the confidence I needed to continue to do that.
Yeah. Confidence is key. If you don't have the confidence in what you do, then nobody in your potential prospects aren't going to see it either. And it's extremely...
Yeah. I mean, if I don't believe that I can help you, you're not going to believe that I can, right? Like, so that is really important. I didn't need to necessarily believe yet in my skills as a salesperson, or believe yet in my skills as a marketer, believe in my skills even, running the entire company. I just needed to believe in my expertise at first, especially being that consultant type of business. Like I just needed to believe in that and at least exude that, because that was the one thing I could really stand on and be like, no, I do know this stuff. I might not be the best salesperson yet. I might not be the best marketer yet. I might not be any of those other things, but you can't erode confidence in your expertise just because you don't have the confidence in those other areas yet.
I love it. So out of curiosity, like what was the result that you got for this person that you helped from the spin class? Like what was that improvement?
Yeah. So for her, and every business I think has like specific things that they're working on, but for her, they were moving from not being very profitable at that point to an increase of about 7% in her profit margins in 90 days, and then removing herself from a lot of the work. So hiring another team member that was then able to take on a lot of the administrative duties that she was trying to do. She was teaching, she was leading the company, she was doing the marketing, she was at the admin desk, right? And so still managing that small operation, but she was able to bring in a team member who was able to execute a lot of those things without her, just by setting up some of those systems and leadership that she needed to embody to be able to get there. And that did create that financial improvement as well. And that was like, years ago. And one of my very first examples, we've had big increases with profit margins in 90 days, or revenue, or largest launches that people have ever had. One of the biggest wins we've had recently, a COO like making a decision to launch an entire product without the approval, or like needing the CEO to be in on every single thing. And she was like, felt so much like release that I didn't have to be there to like I didn't even have to make the decision, because she felt like she was the only one thinking about the revenue, thinking about the projections, thinking about what was going to happen. And so even just that shift of decision-making power was huge. And it created like their biggest launch ever, which is a multi-million-dollar launch. So there's so many wins along the way, but like having that first one, and I don't think I've reflected on that first one in a very long time. So it's always really, really fun to like think about, well, it's come a long way, right? Like,
yep. Awesome. Okay. So we talked about your first one. We talked about your most recent one. Is there another one that stands out that's like, maybe for you personally, it's like, this was the most fun, or maybe like the most creative solution that saw an amazing result that you didn't expect? But like, is there another example that kind of sticks out that was, I don't want to say unexpected, but just that sticks out?
So I have a client who runs a meal delivery service. Their name is Eat the 80, and they were shipping meals. They live locally in Gainesville, Florida, and they were shipping meals just to their local area. They were fresh to home delivery. And so in our first 90 days of working together, what we did was get the CEO out of a lot of the things that she did not need to be doing. So she was still printing nutrition labels and putting them on the meals. And at the time, that felt like she was the only one who could do that. That's how it felt to her. And I know that might seem silly, but it's so true. And there's probably things inside of your business that they seem like they're the only thing you can do and no one else knows how to do them. So you get stuck in them. But like her greatest value was sales, focusing on sales. She was like our main salesperson and getting out into the community to build those relationships and make those sales. And so just by removing a lot of tasks like that for her, in 90 days, we created a 13% profit margin increase inside what is a very operationally dense supply chain, right? Like you think of a lot of these online businesses, they don't have a lot of overhead or operational costs as it relates to food, a building, people, labor, right? Drivers, delivery, refrigerators. So like all of these things add up, and to create a 13% profit margin increase in one quarter was life-changing for them. And what that gave them the space to do was what we did in the next quarter, was what we transitioned them from fresh to home delivery into a flash frozen process. So now they ship regionally. So they have now expanded their entire market and their entire market opportunity by changing the entire product process, right? So we had to get new freezers, new machinery, which is very expensive, but giving them the space in their profit margins by her focusing on the thing that only she can do or that she is doing best is the sales piece. It allowed them to basically shift their entire business model to open up the opportunity for more scalability. So they were kind of at capacity. And I always tell people, like, do not add SKUs, do not add other revenue streams until we're at capacity, because every SKU that you add is going to take up additional resources. It's going to take up more people. It's going to take up more marketing. It's going to take up more sales efforts, right? So they were at a capacity, and then we were able to shift them into a new market to open up more capacity. And now their entire process has changed. So I feel like that's like a near and dear one to my heart, because it was a really, it's a grassroots company. Like they started, bootstrapped, and they've grown it to over 7 figures. And now they are still in a phase of like, hard growth, right? Like it doesn't mean that right now they're, experiencing the best month of their life, because when you transition, sometimes that takes a little bit of time to like build up the momentum. And so I'm just so proud of them, because they've opened up this capacity, they're sticking with it, they're doing the work. And now they understand, okay, now that we have more capacity, we need to feed in more leads, right? Like now they have a whole nother bottleneck to focus on, which is something they can do. They just have to stay focused on it. And I think those are always exciting to like see the physical changes for me.
That's fantastic. I love that story. I love the different types of success stories. I mean, it's not every day that I get to talk to an operational expert. I mean, because I can only imagine, like when you look, like the way that you look at a business has to be completely different than the way that I would look at a business. Like I said, I'm a marketing and sales mind. So I look at them like, where's the opportunity in growth? But that might mean adding a new SKU, which isn't necessarily the right thing to do, like you mentioned.
Right. And so it is that. It's just that, right? Like it's not that I'm like this super genius. It's just that I have a different perspective. I'm looking from a different side of the mountain, right? Like over at your mountain. And I'm like, oh. So I work with really smart, brilliant business owners, which is sometimes very intimidating for me too. I'm like, am I going to be able to give them what they need? And it is, like you said, yes, I can, because I do have this different perspective, this different lens, this paradigm shift of how I'm thinking. That can be usually what it is like a super small tweak that they're like, there's no way that's going to make a huge difference. And I'm like, it is. Just try it. And if it sucks after 90 days, then you can go add your other revenue stream that's going to cost you a ton of resources to create. Just give me 90 days and watch what happens, right? So we've done this in e-commerce businesses just by increasing the order value of something, because she was about to add a whole nother revenue stream, a whole nother SKU, which was a whole nother manufacturing line, because it was a physical product. And I was like, let's hold off on that. Like, this is what we need to focus on first. Let's see if we can double, even triple your average order value. And like, those are the types of things that I can see very easily, because I have a different perspective. Like your face is like too close to the piece of paper that you're trying to read,
Yeah, 100%. Adrienne, we talked about a ton of stuff today. I mean, we talked about your whole journey and how your thing is creating operational excellence, right? And that is your specialty. That's your expertise. We talked about from when you went to school, you got your master's degree, and I took some notes. So if I butcher anything, please cut me off and say, nope, this is what I actually meant. So I have literally 2 full pages of notes that I scribbled through. You at one point went to be a safari guide. Were you a safari guide, or were you just training to become one?
I was trained and certified, and then decided that I lived there for about 4 months, and then realized that if I wanted to be a safari guide, I was going to have to live there off the grid, which was kind of appealing to me at the time. Like I had no contact with my family the entire time I was there. This was back in 2008. So didn't really have like a, iPhone at the time or self-service when you're living in a national park. But later decided that was not going to be my career path or where I could create the most change. But I did really have a passion for like conservation, and still do.
So in 2008, you were there, and then ultimately you went to go work for a Fortune 500 paper company. You were trained at Lean Six Sigma, and you started to really embody this operational excellence. You didn't align with the environment, that you were working in and you sought to change. That led you to exercise your creative efforts where you just started blogging and sharing the information that you already knew to say, hey, maybe somebody's going to be interested and would find value in what I'm doing. So then you found Dave Ramsey and Financial University. You got out of debt, discovered the book Quitter, and ultimately you started just working with some clients for free to see, hey, maybe somebody would be interested in what I've got, right? And that has led you to now just working with some amazing companies and making tremendous impacts in their life and in their business. Is there anything that we left out that you wanted to make sure that we included about your journey and about your story?
I don't think there's anything. I mean, there's probably lots we left out, right? How much can we cover in an hour? But I feel like you got a really good summary of what happened. I would just say that this next opportunity that I'm leaning into with this partnership with Mike Michalowicz, and his book is called Clockwork. Our company is called Run Like Clockwork. That opportunity came to me by leaning into this expertise, and he was looking for someone who was an expert at operations for small businesses. He was studying Lean Six Sigma at the time, and when through a mutual relationship, someone introduced us because I was so hard leaning into this, this is what I do, this is my background, but I need to figure out how can I talk about it to small business owners who have no idea. And he was the first person he was kind of looking for me when we found each other just through relationships. And he was like, wait, you have a background in Lean Six Sigma? And I was like, yes, do you know what that is? Right. And we had the nerdiest conversation ever because he was really trying to learn all about that, but he was trying to apply it to small businesses. And I was like, oh, that's what I do. And so it was literally just an opportunity that I could not have put on my goals list, right? But by really leaning into that true expertise that I have and sharing that with people so that they could connect us. And again, staying in my lane, Mike is the person that will write the book and go speak. And I'm the person that can help you actually implement these things. And so that was just a true, opportunity presented to me because of that expertise that I've had. And it was so funny because one of the reasons he was even more interested, because there's a lean in the book about bees and how they are the most efficient creatures on the planet. And I was like, well, yeah, I took a beekeeping class in college because I have a wildlife and ecology degree. And he was like, what? And so then we ended up talking all about my expertise around bees and how they are the most efficient creatures and how they manage their hive and work efficiency inside of their system and how we can learn from them. And he was just like, this is so interesting. It just felt like the perfect opportunity, but only because I think of relationships that have, I've been proactive about.
Yeah. I mean, you've clearly put yourself out there just with blogging, right? Just sharing what you're passionate about. And that is kind of the first step is you have to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
Time and time again, when I have guests on and I say, how did you make this happen? How did this opportunity arrive? 9 times out of 10, it's because they were somehow putting themselves out there in building relationships and making connections. And so I think that's fantastic. 100%. And this is going to be a huge opportunity for you with Mike. And I'm very excited about it for you.
Me too. Thank you.
So let's drop some links, right? Where can people connect with you? What's coming up? Let's do it.
Yep. So they can connect with me. I'm on all social media at Adrienne Dorison. If you want to learn more about Run Like Clockwork or the consulting or the work that we're doing, you can go to runlikeclockwork.com. That's where you'll find all the information about that. And those are the main places. If you're interested in getting some free resources on the operational efficiency side, again, go to runlikeclockwork.com. There's some free resources there. As soon as that book launches, go buy it. It'll be out in August. So we're excited.
Adrienne, I had a blast. I learned so much about just all things operations, right? Creating operational excellence. So I appreciate you spending time and sharing your wisdom. And for those listening right now, please go connect with Adrienne. Go sign up for her mailing list and go to Run Like Clockwork and buy that book when it comes out. And when you do, connect with her, let her know that you heard her on Experts Unleashed and just give her some love and let her know how powerful our audience is. So, Adrienne, thanks again. And
thank you for having me. This was great. Thanks for having me, Joel.
Yeah, of course. And so we'll wrap up this episode and we'll see you all on the next one. Take care. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and we look forward to giving you the next one. Now, if you want additional trainings and content outside of the podcast, I release exclusive video trainings on my Experts Unleashed YouTube channel. And if you'd like to come hang out with thousands of other fellow experts, join our Facebook group community where we do hangouts and webinars to help support you in your journey. Finally, if you'd like my personal help to develop, launch, or scale your business, contact me directly for private consulting opportunities to see if any spots are available. And you can find all of the information above at expertsunleashed.com.